My name is not important. What is important is what I'm going to do.
In the years 2014 to 2015, the game studio Destructive Creations was under a lot of fire from both the internet and Steam when they decided to release one of the most controversial games of the year. They even managed to get taken down by Steam for a period of time. The game was simply known as Hatred, a top-down shoot-em-up where you control a serial killer with no remorse of who he's gunning down. This is its story. On October 16, 2014, a game announcement trailer was released. This trailer showed the game's protagonist, or as the developers categorized him, the antagonist, as well as some gameplay. All in the dark black and white style, which is going to be quite the theme throughout the entirety of the game. This trailer was already met with a lot of criticism for a variety of reasons. One outstanding reason was of course the idea of playing as a serial killer, with not much else of an objective but to kill people. Civilians, police officers, and more. All in a variety of gruesome visual ways, really portraying the lack of sympathy the main character has. Although this being rather controversial in itself, it wasn't enough to get the internet riled up to the extent that it did. What really added fuel to the fire was Anita Sarkeesian, a quite well-known feminist and media critic who did the rounds back in those years, speaking up against the treatment of women as well as the violence against women in video games. She also had a big impact on the whole Gamergate scandal, which was flourishing in those years. Many around the internet had very varying opinions of her actions, and she often received many hateful messages, letters, and even the occasional death threat. But just days prior to the release of the Hatred announcement trailer, Anita came out saying she had to cancel a speech in Utah due to some rather severe death threats and the fact that the police was unable to take action against people who could enter the event with concealed firearms if they had the permits for them. This, of course, was the talk of the internet for a few days, which would then culminate in the trailer being released about a supposed serial killer who would kill indiscriminately. This, of course, did not go down too well with a lot of people, seeing it as a huge marketing stunt of the darkest caliber. When they were asked about the trailer release, Jaroslaw, who is the CEO of Destructive Creations, responded with, "We have no idea about this. We don't follow the news from the Western world while there's a war right outside of our border, you know." He's referring to the Russia-Ukrainian war, which was already starting to show signs back in those years. Some saw this as a sort of nice break from the norm, stating that it is nice once in a while to realize that there are game developers out there who have more important things to worry about than the drama surrounding the game development culture. However, one of the common critiques that people had about the trailer was the game simply looked mediocre, calling it a generic isometric shooter with a focus on violence. The version of the trailer, which came out on the 14th, has since been taken down, and a new version was uploaded on October 20th, which is why you can see certain parts of it blurred out. Later on, the criticism evolved even further when journalists and readers began digging a bit deeper. This led to them finding that the CEO and several of the team's members were following various homophobic, anti-Islam, and nationalist organizations on Facebook. One particular group seemed to stir the most trouble, as the CEO himself, Jaroslaw, was a part of a group known as the Polska Liga Obrony, or Polish Defense League, whose goal was, and I love the wording of this, to prevent young strapping Muslim men and dusky princes from picking up pure Polish women. With all this buzz around the game and the team, Jaroslaw decided to step up for an interview with Vice. In this interview, he showed a completely different side of the story. He presented himself as this soft-spoken black metal fan, a hard-working animator with a very sarcastic yet attentive personality. And knowing that Jaroslaw has been haunted by several journalists over the course of several months due to the game's trailer and concept, Vice decided to romance him a bit instead. Learning things such as he prefers American and Polish death metal bands such as Black Witchery and the Long Island band known as Suffocation, who popularized the greatly named Cookie Monster growl. But when the conversation turned to the game, Jaroslaw says that him and the team were expecting some hype around the game, but were overwhelmed by the scale of the attention they got, just not in the way that they expected. He even mentions that he was surprised by the sheer amount of positive fan mail that he received, because of the way that he wanted the game to be represented. His main goal of the game was to create a violent shooter video game, but he wanted it to be different from the market standard. Whereas a lot of big violent games such as Far Cry, Call of Duty, and even Assassin's Creed all try to give a reason to the killings happening in the game, Jaroslaw just wanted to create a game with the same amount of violence, but would stray away from justifying any of it. Despite all of this, they still went ahead and tried to release the game. The original plan was to release the game on both Steam and GOG.com, but considering the team's small size, they decided to stick with just one platform, as trying to get on both would be too major of a task. So on December 15th, the game was put on Steam Greenlight in order to get the game onto the platform. And it was received quite well, raising quite a few positive votes on the platform. It was, however, very short-lived, as on the very next day, on December 16th, the game was taken off Greenlight. This was all due to Steam moderators seeing the message of the game and all the discussions that had happened around it. This resulted in them taking down the game with the message simply stating, "We want to let you guys know that based on what we see on Greenlight, we would not publish Hatred on Steam. As such, we'll be taking it down." Of course, this was not the intention of Destructive Creations. They wanted the game to come out and would continue to work on the game despite Steam's decision, stating that even though games like Postal and Manhunt are still on Steam, they respect their decision, and they would continue working on the game since even though they were taken down, they still had the statistics to show that there were at least 13,000 people out there who would love to see Hatred be released as a full game. However, all of the commotion surrounding the game apparently got the attention of Gabe Newell himself. He had seen that the game was taken down from Greenlight, but hadn't been informed on why, so he looked into the situation, which resulted in the following. Gabe Newell decided to send an email directly to Jaroslaw apologizing for the situation. "Hi Jaroslaw, yesterday I heard that we were taking Hatred down from Greenlight. Since I wasn't up to speed, I asked around internally to find out why we had done that. It turns out that it wasn't a good decision, and we'll be putting Hatred back up. My apologies to you and your team. Steam is about creating tools for content creators and customers. Good luck with your game." The game was then promptly put back up on Greenlight. From this, Hatred got even more attention than before, now being known as the game that got banned and then unbanned from Steam Greenlight. And with this massive boost in attention, Hatred quickly shot up to be one of the top games on Steam Greenlight at the time. At this point, there is no way that Steam would be able to take the game back down after all of this, so things were looking up for the Polish developers, despite many people still viewing the message of the game as a bit controversial. But there's one thing that seems to stick with the game like nothing else, and that is still simply the idea that people find the game mediocre at best. As the game returned to Greenlight, Reddit threads popped up almost immediately with several users commenting things such as, "It could stay on Steam Greenlight, but I wouldn't buy it. I don't see the appeal," and "It looks like the developers won this one. Loads of media attention, and it'll probably still end up on Steam. All for a game that will probably be average at the very best." But despite some minor backlash, on December 29th, the game was approved through Steam Greenlight and allowed to be published on Steam. However, things would still not go smoothly from here on out. With the violent topics of the game still stood strong, so did the ESRB rating of the game. In January of 2015, the game would receive the very restrictive adults-only rating, describing the game as having intense violence, blood and gore, and strong language, which admittedly isn't wrong. However, this would bring a whole other set of problems, as this rating would restrict the game from being sold in any of the major retail stores, at least in the US, as well as any of the mainstream consoles, as they all forbid adults-only games on their platform. This means it would be impossible for the game to come out on PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo platforms. It is also only the third game to ever receive this rating without it being for purely sexual content. The other games which has received this rating are Manhunt 2 and Thrill Kill. This, of course, is not a fate that any developer wants to face, as they want to have their games seen by as many people as possible. One of the developers spoke out saying the following: "We would prefer to get the standard mature rating, because with adult only we would have problems getting on consoles in the future. But on the other hand, I think you guys would be disappointed with it." While then continuing on to saying, "We're not convinced why Hatred got the adults-only rating while it lacks any sexual content. But it's still some kind of achievement to have the second game in history getting the adults-only rating for violence and harsh language. ESRB then wanted to clarify that it did not give out this rating because of the overuse of harsh language, as there actually wasn't that much, but more so because of the context of the game itself. And even though Destructive Creations were against the rating, they wouldn't want to change things about their game to adhere to a better rating. Other games have done just that, to be able to be sold on more platforms. These games would include GTA San Andreas with the hot coffee incident, Manhunt 2 also ended up making some changes, and Fahrenheit: The Indigo Prophecy, which is a fantastic game by the way, can only recommend that one. This wouldn't be the last time this rating would haunt the studio, however. Shortly before the game's release on June 1st, 2015, Twitch announced that they would be banning streaming of adult-only games, stating that they previously would ban games on a game basis. But as that became too labor-intensive, they decided that all adult-only games would not be allowed on the platform. But the main crux of the game was something people had been seeing all the way through the game's cycle. It was simply very mediocre. The trailer and concept itself might have been very eye-opening, offensive, and controversial. But as soon as people actually started playing the game, they came to the realization that the game wasn't actually all that. Gameplay-wise, the game became very samey very quickly, as there was not really much variation throughout the entirety of the game. As one Poop Creep, great name by the way, write in a review, to summarize the gameplay, kill a bunch of civilians, they get bum-rushed by hundreds of lobotomized police that do chip damage, curb stomp them, and you will immediately return all of your health. But is the story any good? Well, that can be very subjective, but one thing people seem to agree on is that the ending is quite cheap and unenjoyable, a thing that seemed to ruin the game for quite a few people. But despite all the backlash, it very quickly became one of the best-selling games on Steam at the time, with around 3,000 active players at one given point and an estimated $4 million in revenue. This almost immediately fell down the following month, putting the game in between 30 to 40 active players on average. However, the game's developers did give people plenty of options for modding the game. So, in December of 2019, a mod came out, simply titled Hatred 1.666, which seems to have fixed what many people didn't like about the game. It would add a first-person and third-person mode to the game, change the difficulty to be more challenging, and even change the ending to something people found way more realistic. So all in all, Hatred is a game shrouded in controversy and hardship throughout its entire development cycle, but eventually ended up as a game that got well known throughout the gaming world. Not for its stunning gameplay and storytelling, but more so for the lengths it was willing to go to keep the feeling of the game close to what the developers envisioned. And without knowing if it's in production, Jaroslaw has already revealed some plans for Hatred 2, in which there might be 3 playable characters, a grim-looking one like in Hatred 1, a Hollywood-style black American tough guy, and a lesbian girl who hates everything. Which, I must admit, sounds kind of amazing. And if you guys know of any other interesting gaming stories, feel free to share them in the comments. I would love to maybe make a video about them in the future. Thanks for watching.